Hello and welcome again to Politics and Societies of Southeast Europe, to our section on language. And in this segment, I want to talk about recent and contemporary conflicts over language and the policy that has followed after the policy of equality of languages in the period of state socialism. There followed in the nationalist period a policy of language separation, of establishing and underlining and trying to strengthen the distinctiveness of languages. And I'd like to look at this a little bit state by state. So let's look first at Croatia. And in Croatia, you see a couple of opposing currents, okay? On the one hand, you have what you see here on the pictures are two linguists. One of the linguists, and you've been given one of her texts to look at as a supplementary reading for this week, is Snježana Kordić. And Snježana Kordić is an opponent of movements toward language purity. She says that the language that was previously called Serbo-Croatian is a polycentric language, a language with different independent sources of standards, all of which are mutually intelligible, and that distinctions, and particularly distinctions resulting in discrimination, should not be permitted to result from differences in the use of language. On the other picture, you see another linguist, Sanda Ham, who is professor of linguistics at the University of Osijek in Croatia. And Sanda Ham has produced in several editions what she wants to promote as a standard grammar of the Croatian language with an emphasis on the Croatian qualities of the Croatian language. That is, what sorts of language use, what grammar, what words, and so on are properly Croatian and should be promoted, and which ones are not and should be discouraged. So these are the two carriers of the debate over language as it's carried out in Croatia. The first against movements for language purity, and the second very much for promotion of language purity. And it is probably the language purity side that has the upper hand, at least in a lot of official policy. So pure Croatian is promoted through administration, is promoted through education, and yet, interestingly, does not seem to catch on as much as the policymakers might hope it would in such practices as popular culture and everyday speech, where people tend to continue to prefer to speak a language that may be in many ways recognizably Croatian, but also contains elements of mixture and taking advantage of opportunities used by variants that are available from the other spoken variants of the language. In Serbia, much of the focus on language has to do with what alphabet is used, what script is used to write the language. So Serbo-Croatian, during the time when it was an official language, one of the official languages of Yugoslavia, was defined as a language with multiple lexical alternatives, multiple grammatical alternatives, and as a language that is spoken using two scripts, both the Latin script and the Cyrillic script, with the Cyrillic script being dominant in places like Serbia and Montenegro, the Latin script being dominant in Croatia and in most of Bosnia and Herzegovina. What happened very often during the period of state socialism was that there was an increasing tendency to use the Latin script, in particular for publishing, for reasons that were partly related to globalization. That is, this is the script that is used in more parts of the world, at least, than the Cyrillic script, and partly for economic reasons. If you published a book, then you are more likely to be able to sell it in more places. If it was in if it was published using an alphabet that could be understood by readers in that place. And so a sense developed that the Cyrillic alphabet is something distinctive to Serbian language, Serbian culture, Serbian character, and also that it is threatened. And these pictures that you see here are various expressions of public campaigns that come and go from time to time to promote use of the Cyrillic script. The first one that you see in the upper left corner there is the letter A in Cyrillic with the slogan that says, Cyrillic is the script with a Serbian face. Below that you see a wall graffiti saying Chirilica, so Cyrillic is not dead. This is not written in any of the languages in the region, but is transliterated phonetically as an English sentence written in the Cyrillic script. So this is an interesting way of preserving the Cyrillic script, is to use it to write the English language. On the right side at the top there, you see another one of these promotional slogans. It says Cyrillic, and then it says Ne odrecimo se najsrpskijeg, so let us not give up on the thing that is most Serbian. And below that, another slogan, this from a poster on the street, saying, remain Serbian, write Cyrillic. So the implicit threat there is that if you do not write in Cyrillic, then you are in some way insufficiently Serbian or not Serbian. In other places, language variants have developed differently. So if we go to Bosnia and Herzegovina, I've got two illustrations for you in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The first is, okay, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, what you have had since the signing of the peace agreement in Dayton in 1995 is a system that is based on the idea that there are three constituent people of Bosnia and Herzegovina, so the Bosniaks, Croats, Serbs, that these three people speak three languages, Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian, and that these three languages are equal. So what you see on the package here is a box of cigarettes. And you have the standard warning label on the bottom of the box of cigarettes. The first two, one of them is Bosnian and one of them is Croatian, but I can't tell you which one, because, as you can see by looking at them for even a second, they are absolutely identical. The third one is meant to be Serbian, and it is also identical to the other two, except it is written in the Cyrillic alphabet rather than the Latin alphabet. And you will see this convention used a lot of places. So on television stations, when films are shown where the dialogue is in another language, you will have three lines of subtitles, one in Bosnian, one in Croatian, and one in Serbian, all saying the same thing. The result being that for many films, you can't see what's happening on the bottom half of the screen at all. I'll give you another example from Bosnia, and this is a little snippet. It is from a transcript of one of the trials at the Hague Tribunal, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And let me give you a second there just to read what is in this transcript here, and then I'll be quiet for a moment and start talking again. Okay, so you see what's happening here. What's happening here is a witness has been brought to give evidence to the court, and now the judges are questioning the witness about the evidence that they have presented. And one of the judges has a question for the witness. He said, you have presented some death certificates. What language are these death certificates written in? And the witness doesn't really know what to say. He takes a look at the certificates. He says, well, there aren't any funny words that would suggest that it was written in Croatian, and it's not written in Cyrillic, so let's say that it's not in Serbian. So I guess if I have to answer the question, it must be Bosnian, but then he says, it is very difficult for me to distinguish between these three languages of ours. And at this point, the judge who was asked the question says, I didn't realize that I was asking you a difficult question. I just wanted to know whether it was written in one of the languages that is used in that place. So this is the kind of confusion that results from this policy of drawing distinctions between things that are fundamentally the same. What are some other questions that come up when you try to draw distinctions? Well, these are questions that come up in Montenegro. Let's have a look at Montenegro. In Montenegro, Montenegro becomes an independent state in 2006. So it is a national state with a national anthem, national flag, and it's got to have a national language, which up until that point had been Serbo-Croatian. Many people called it Serbian. They needed to develop a Montenegrin language, and so linguists got to work, drawing out those aspects of language, especially spoken language, that were distinctively Montenegrin. And then in producing the language, they decided, well, the Montenegrin language, to be distinct from the Serbian language and Bosnian language and so on, should have three new letters. And so they invented three new letters that are supposed to be representative of distinctive ways in which these letters are sometimes pronounced in Montenegro, and then developed a campaign of publicity to publicize the use of these three new letters. The last time I was in Montenegro, I went to a conference, and at the beginning of the conference, when you arrived at the hotel, they handed you a little conference pack telling you this is where you can get breakfast and these are places you can go and so on. And there was a section on language. And the section said in English, it said the official language of Montenegro is Montenegrin. And then it said speakers of Croatian, Bosnian, or Serbian will be understood perfectly. So that is an indication perhaps that this campaign to establish and codify a new language may not have been taken seriously, at least not by all hotel employees in Montenegro. Now, these different events related to language are occasionally the object of controversy. The term Serbo-Croatian, to refer to the shared language of the region, has fallen out of use. You will sometimes see used the abbreviation BHS, meaning Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. It leaves Montenegrin out. Some people like this as a replacement for Serbo-Croatian. Some people do not. You will very often find people from the region saying, for example, if they're writing a CV, what languages do you speak? They will list. If they speak, say, Serbian, they will list Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, Montenegrin, so they get 4 languages for the price of 1. And there are a lot of funny stories about people profiting from the fact that that foreigners treat languages that are fundamentally the same as being distinct from one another, but occasionally these distinctions become meaningful, and they become meaningful particularly at moments when language policies come to intersect with policies on the recognition and on the rights of different ethnic and national groups. So, for example, if we take a look again at Croatia, in Croatia, there is an official state language, Croatian. The Serbian language is declared to be a minority language. So according to official state policy in Croatia, there is a majority language, which is the official language. Serbian and Croatian are different languages, but the Serbian language has equal status. That is, there are guarantees of language rights for speakers of Serbian as for the speakers of other minority languages. This became an issue in 2013 when the Croatian government, having been persuaded that they have obligations for recognition of minority languages under the European Union Convention on minority rights, decided in Vukovar that signs on public buildings ought to be in both Serbian and Croatian. That is to say that the same thing would be written on the signs twice, once in the Latin script and once in the Cyrillic script. Now, Vukovar is a city with a unique history. During the war, when Croatia became independent, it was the site of intense fighting and contestation. We're talking about street to street, house to house fighting, with the result that almost the entire city was destroyed. So it's a place of painful memory and is considered a symbol of the suffering that independence involved in Croatia. So what you see here in the pictures is a ceremony that was repeated every day for a month or so in 2013. That is, somebody would come up to a public building, in this case the police station, and put up a sign saying, "This is the police station," in Croatian and Serbian. Then a group of local activists would come. Here's the fellow with the hammer, and they would smash the sign, take it down, and parade around the city with the sign. And the next day somebody would come with a new sign. It would get smashed and taken down again, and so on. This developed into a political confrontation and a crisis, not only between Croatia and Serbia, but internally among residents of Croatia, particularly among ones who thought that applying the principle of equality of rights for minorities was a good one, and other ones who saw a threat in expressions of equality toward the ethnically Serb minority, who were still regarded as aggressors. And so there were protests, and here are some symbols from the protests. In the first photo there, you see the sign, which has not been smashed, but the part of it that is written in the Cyrillic script is painted over with some red spray paint. Next to that, you see one of the T-shirts that people wore as a part of the protests, with the slogan, "Vukovar will never be Vukovar." So that the first time that Vukovar is written in the Latin script, the second time in the Cyrillic script. This next one, the bottom left corner, is my favorite. It is a protester with a very festive hat, and a symbol from the Croatian flag on the hat, carrying a broom, saying, "Here is something that must be swept out." This is a common symbol in political protests. And on the broom, he has his slogan, which is meant to say, "Hrvatima ne treba ćirilica," that is, Croats do not need Cyrillic, except he has written it in the Latin script, but using Serbian grammar. In Croatian grammar, that would not be "Hrvatima ne treba ćirilica," nego Hrvati ne trebaju ćirilicu. So he's got his linguistic resentment right, but needs to study the differences that he is promoting a bit more. And then on the bottom right here are people who are presenting a counter-protest to the protests that are represented in the other photos, and they have a slogan addressed to, he was then the Prime Minister of Croatia, Zoran Milanovic, and their slogan says, "Milanovic, these people are chauvinists, so you can ignore them." Now, the intensity of this conflict, as much as it was short-lived, indicates that questions about the distinctive status of linguistic habits and linguistic traditions are very much alive. So do we have an answer to the question that everybody is fighting about, particularly about Serbo-Croatian? Is it one language, or two, or three, or four? My answer to this is we can't answer this question as a matter of language. It's a question of politics, and it's a question of whether distinctiveness and differences between different groups are going to be raised to a particular level at which they're likely to be a source of tension, or whether they are not. And what you see in these pictures are a couple of places where people are trying to overcome this forcing of differences. One, you see this young couple, one of them draped in a Serbian flag, the other draped in a Croatian flag, who seem not to be having problems getting along with one another. And on the right here is an image of the site. I mentioned a bit earlier Snježana Kordić and her opposition to these pursuing these policies of language purity. This is the web page of a group of linguists and other public intellectuals, mostly from the region, but not all of them are from the region, signing their declaration on language, saying the different linguistic traditions that are mutually intelligible can be thought of as constituting a single polycentric language, that is, a language with multiple standards, all of which are correct, and that distinctions between them should not be used for discrimination. Do we come out of this with any kind of hypothesis? Maybe this. The minor language differences that exist are observable. They do exist. They're probably not all that important most of the time. Most of the time they're a little bit amusing. But the conditions that give them content can make them important, especially if they're brought forward in particular political situations.